All right, welcome everybody. We have a small crowd tonight. I'm guessing that everyone is like me and exhausted. I'd be very pleased if this didn't go early, and then I'll just go to bed. But as long as we want to keep talking, we'll keep talking. Our topic for tonight is basically anything anybody wants to talk about in leading up to competition. If you need help with something, if you made some observations out of week 0 that you want to share, advice, questions anybody has about how teams are feeling, I mostly open floor. So anybody have anything they want to start with? I will share that with KnightKrawler, we're in a weird situation with our odometry. Our sword drive isn't doing what we expected it to do with Path Planner and trying to get our autos to work. We talked to a lot of people at week 0. Our programmers went around and talked to a lot of people that were running Swerve to get some thoughts and advice on what they thought might be going on with our Swerve drive. So we have a very long list of things to test, but we're running SDS with MK4Is. We had Path Planner working great. We had the Aphomia and Ashley gave the talk last week about everything they were doing with our MK3 modules on our 2022 robot and how everything was working. And then when we went to our MK4Is, we still haven't been able to get it to work. And so we think right now it's either a motor inversion issue that we're not accounting for the motors being upside down properly in our Swerve drive, or someplace we have either our gyro is not inverted in the right place because we're running a NavX, or we have a mismatch in degrees and radians someplace. So students are working on a plan to track that down on Monday. Otherwise, mechanically, I feel pretty good about where we're at. And I think our teleop will be in a good place for Duluth. Anybody else have anything they want to share or any questions I have about that they're looking for help on?
I'm curious, you had mentioned that one of your targets was to do the trap. Have you been successful?
We successfully trapped last night after week 0. We tried twice during week 0. And the first time we attempted to trap, we just climbed basically 30 seconds into the match because we wanted to make sure that we gave ourselves enough time to do that. And unfortunately, it's hard to see across the field. And I think it was the Robettes came through and they went under the trap and hit us. And
yeah,
it was
our controls weren't working properly that match. Apparently, she was having a lot of trouble controlling the robot.
You guys took more damage than we did. But you guys seem to be back up and running just fine.
Oh yeah, just one of the hooks bent a little bit, so we pounded that back into place. And those PVC bars we have across are just to prevent notes from getting stuck on, so they aren't secured very well, and they just popped off.
Oh, well, it looked a lot worse than it was, I guess. So the first time we tried, we got knocked off the stage because of a collision. And the second time we tried, we have a mechanism that flips up to hold the door open. It was rubbing on the stage, and so it wouldn't flip completely open with the amount of pressure that we had on it. So we modified that after week 0, and we were able to trap once, and we got it to work. And then, of course, we tried to video it the second time, and then we ran into a different problem. And so we've got some minor changes to make, but I feel optimistic that it will work some of the time in Duluth, hopefully all the time, but some of the time in Duluth. It's going to take us a fair bit of time to get climbed and get the trap to work until we can fully automate it. But we saw it work once. How's that for an answer?
Well, that's more than most people who don't even attempt it.
But I agree, Eric. We rated it very high on our priority list, and then as we started building the robot and catting the robot and putting things together, we realized that we had several different ideas, and we wouldn't know if any of them were going to work until we see how the robot climbed on the chain. So we needed to know whether we were going to be mostly level, if we were going to be tipping back a lot, whether our shooting arm would be strong enough to tip the robot forward if needed. So there were a lot of unknowns that we needed to know. And so although in our strategic design, we rated trap very high in our priorities, it turned out that there was very little we could do until we actually saw how the robot performed on the chain. So priority-wise, it was high, but in reality, it was sort of the very last thing we did and barely got it done for week 0. And then it didn't work at all at week 0.
So has anybody come up with some strategies that they think will work to get more? Or I've seen different things where some robots, we went to a different week 0. So that was up in St. Michael. But so some robots decided they were going to shoot across the field and accumulate and other. Is that something that people are going for, or is that seem like a strategy, or what are? I don't know if anybody wants to share things they think are going to be helpful.
One thing that we noticed at our week 0 event was that it's kind of hard to be a robot that does both amp and trap, just knowing when to do it. And it's the communication between like when to amp the speaker is really hard. And so it's what we're thinking is probably easiest if you have robots that do multiple, just to have them do one thing per match, at least for week 1. Like if you can do amp and trap, just do amp for a given match, or not amp and trap, amp and speaker, or just do speaker. And that way you generally, like, we found that usually like 1 on the amp and then 1 on speaker and then the third just kind of doing whatever is enough to keep the numbers pretty even.
I'll be honest, I didn't get to see a lot of our week 0. I think I was busy running around fighting fires and dealing with issues the entire morning of our week 0. I think I got to see our first match just before lunch. But a lot of my day was running around trying to manage and run the events. So I didn't get to see a lot of matches, and my day did not allow me to watch any of the matches on the replay today on YouTube. So I'm not going to be very much help on that advice. Does anyone else have any strategies they had seen? The matches that I did see, Eric, though, I didn't see anything like people shooting across 2/3 of the field to fill their side. That's interesting. That would have been interesting to see, but the matches that I saw at our week 0, I didn't see anybody do that. Jeremy, you were at our week 0. Did anybody else shoot across the field like that?
No, it was all speaker mostly, or people just kind of testing amp. There was no at Egan. We went to both Egan and KnightKrawler, and both were great, but not a lot of strategy discussion. So our discussion with our drive coach student is like, be prepared for more of that, because there was just none anywhere. So I agree with Mason. I think it's going to be, I think the easiest way week 1 at least is just feel out how good the robots are. That's the other part of it, is knowing who can do what and actually having that happen is going to be important. So.
Yeah, we also noticed that shooting from the subwoofer is dangerous at best, because if you're a robot that can only shoot from there, it's kind of clogged up, especially it's going to be at week 1. Like teams will only have that spot tuned, but also there's a high chance that the notes bounce back and land in your robot. Something we spent last week doing was basically figuring out every place a note can get stuck and either figuring out how to get it loose or preventing it from getting stuck there in the first place. So for us, we have 2 telescoping arms. We've basically tied elastic string across them so it can't get rung over our climber. And the other thing is I've been watching the Israel District 1, and something that was going on there. Well, I mean, it's about an average week 1 where a lot of robots aren't working, but the robots that are tend to be stealing notes from their opposing team's source. there's a lot of that. You got to make sure your human player on the source is staying very attentive, because the human players that just stick notes out, they're all going to get stolen. Our team is looking for notes to steal, and if your human players just chucking them out, we're going to be stealing them.
We did that at Egan and at Irondale, both week 0s too, Mason. Same deal. If a note was on the floor anywhere near our side, we went and grabbed it. So.
The other thing is, like, for the kit bots and the teams that can only pick up from the source, all of those notes that missed are super likely to get stolen by the other alliance.
I will say that one of the things I did notice at our week 0 was that it's sort of the opposite problem, where I think the human players were too nervous about notes getting stolen. We did ground pickup, and it took a long time for the notes to settle down so that you could get there and get them off the floor. And I feel like we need to coach our human players to say, as soon as we've crossed the midline, drop it, so that it settles on the floor and it's not rolling or bouncing around by the time we get there.
Kind of a question, and also our answer is, what is your drive coach doing? Because ours, we need them basically watching the amp status. We need them watching, especially just keeping an eye out on their source. Like, okay, there's no robot even in our side of the field, and they have 4 notes over here. Let's go steal some of those. But it seems like the drive coach has a lot to do, and we're running 2 drivers. We have a driver and a manipulator, and so it's kind of hard to keep an eye out for everything. There's a lot going on in these matches.
Yeah, I think that one came up in a previous week's discussion too. I think if both of your students are actively driving the robot, it's a ton of work for the drive coach to do. Someone made a suggestion, though, which I thought was really good, that if your secondary driver doesn't have a lot to do, then they should act more as a driving coach, and your drive coach should act more of a communication to the other 2 teams, and so you can help with coordination. I really like that suggestion, but it really depends on what the makeup of your drive team looks like. Right now, our control system, the amp scoring is done by the secondary driver, and everything else, assuming that all the code works properly, is done by the primary driver. So if, for example, we have to manually adjust up anything, or if we want to manually spool up the shooter on the way to the amp, our secondary does all that kind of prep stuff or manual override stuff. But if everything on the robot is working perfectly, our secondary driver only needs to do something when we want to score on the amp, and then he's in charge of everything climbing. And that person could act as sort of a second drive coach. But I agree. I think the discussions I've heard on here are the same, that the drive coaches are going to have a really, really busy day when they're back there.
Yeah, the other thing that we noticed, we were running a few practice matches at Mira. Can't even remember what day, they fly by, but visibility is very difficult, especially from the opposite, like diagonal driver station to the source, to even know if you've picked up a note. We don't have lights on our robot for week 1. We will later, but it's something that even seeing your own robot is difficult. And something we noticed is, like, Mira, we have the official field, and so, or like the Andy Mark field, and so it's got the reflective panels. You can kind of see your robot in the reflection, but I think it's going to be a lot up to human players to signal when you have the note. Especially, we have an over the bumper, so you can kind of see it, but I think the under the bumper team is even going to be harder to know if you've latched onto the note and you have it. So that's another role for your drive team.
I can probably share one of what we've done, and that is to detect torque on the input, so they can look and know when it's picked it up, rather than trying to do it visually.
Yeah, another thing that we're doing is we have a beam break to hold the note before we want to shoot it. But if that beam break, we have like a trigger, so when the beam break is triggered, it'll rumble the controllers for a brief second to know that it has been triggered.
We have that exact same feature on a limit switch on both driver and operator. So the driver knows, so they don't need to say it out loud. The driver just starts driving. Like, as soon as he gets to rumble, he's out of there. And then the operator can, figure out the rest of it. So same rumble, and the driver loves it. So
we should add the rumble. We did add LEDs Saturday morning because of that. We had noticed the same thing on Wednesday at Hmong Academy and said, we need to signal the drivers better.
That's great. We use joysticks, not a gamepad, so it rumbles out. Where our drive coach has asked us to put on Smart Dashboard a big red-green block on the screen that indicates when we have a note. We have a beam brake sensor that tells us when we have a note. It's not a beam brake, but it's the color sensor that I don't even remember which one it is, but we did find that one match we had enough orange zest flakes in our indexer that it was detecting the flakes, and it was indicating that we had a note when we didn't. So that's unfortunate. Maybe we're going to have to put a CPU blower fan or something on there to blow away the flakes to keep them away from the sensor.
Well, I think we have an infrared beam brake, and then don't have to worry about color. Originally, we thought about color. That's the detect that it's in the prepared to shoot or something. It's almost automated now. From intake to shooter. So they still need to get a camera on to automatically find the. I don't know if anybody's using cameras to find the note.
The other thing on the topic of the orange zest is the official, like, what considers a good note is pretty bad. Like, the quality, they allowed it to get really messed up before they'll take it off the field. And so something that, like, we did was Mira still had, I don't know, 12 or 15 brand new notes, and we said, well, we'll bring a couple of our crappy notes from our shop to test with as well, because it makes a big difference. But also, as they deteriorate, it's very non-linear. Like, starts out perfectly fine, then as soon as a single team scratches the surface, nothing but flakes for the next few matches. They get really rough really quick.
Yeah, one of the comments that our team had made was that we were really surprised that there was no opportunity for repair. Using gaffer's tape, one layer of gaffer's tape. We were expecting them to be able to say that they could cover a break with one layer. So that's both good and bad, I suppose. But yeah, the pictures that they're showing as this is an acceptable note, they were in pretty rough shape. Basically, unless they're broken, they're going to use them. We also are having I don't want to say a problem, but our shooter performs quite differently, whether you're getting the batch 1 Andy Mark notes or the batch 2 notes. Anything from further back than the podium is sort of a 50-50 kind of probability of whether it'll make it in. I think on our particular shooter, the batch 2 notes, which are stiffer, first of all, they're harder to pick up because of the bend radius that we designed our pickup for. We tested it all with the batch 1 notes. And then, of course, we got the batch 2 notes, and they don't bend as nearly as well. But the batch 2 notes seem to shoot high for us compared to the batch 1 notes. And it's probably because it's more dense. There's more compression or something, and so it's flying slightly differently, and it seems to rise up out of our shooter. I don't know if anyone else is having a concern with that, but it'll be interesting to see which notes we're going to encounter in the competition, or if we're going to encounter both.
What are teams doing about autonomous, especially concerning if you're picking up in the middle 5? Are teams scouting that? Because we've added that to our scouting form, like we're tracking where everybody's picking up. But there's teams that are going to have autonomous that they're saving for later on. I know we probably intend to do some of that kind of stuff.
You're going to save an autonomous for like playoffs?
We have a few sneaky ones.
Okay.
Maybe,
I don't understand. I'm going to be real with you. I don't understand the purpose.
Okay,
so maybe I'm naive and not.
Yeah, the purpose would be if you know that there's maybe 2 robots on the other lines that are going to pick up these specific notes, you go and you mess them up, basically. Especially if your autonomous isn't working so well. With teams with Pathplaner, you can whip up a path really quickly just to mess up another path. And so you could be the bully robot in autonomous if you don't have like a floor intake or something. But that's an opportunity that I think hasn't really presented itself for a lot of events yet.
Just be careful fully crossing that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, you must have a lot of optimism in the Pathfinder to drive accurate. I don't know that I would do that without testing a path first, but we're also really struggling with Pathfinder right now, so I don't have a lot of optimism, period.
We tested a path the first match at Irondale and kind of busted some plywood. So yeah, the pathing can get kind of wild.
Our team's usually like fusing vision data into odometry during auto, because ours is like centimeter accurate pretty much.
Very jealous.
You have a much stronger programming team than 99.9% of teams in Minnesota. I'm gonna say that.
Yeah, it's I will say like all of our code is public. If other teams want to try it, we have our tag tracker V2 is pretty fun, because it's, especially I think it depends a lot on hardware for the April tags, because we've seen a huge improvement from last year. We upgraded from like these crappy Logitech cameras to like $100 cameras that were worth the investment. I'd say now they were a little risky, but they're, I believe, 50 FPS, black and white. The global shutter is a big thing if you're going to try and do it while you're moving and not just sitting still. Because the big change from last year is like, last year you kind of wanted to know where your robot was, but you didn't need to know while moving. But now, especially if you want to aim at the target while you're moving around, you really want to keep that accurate while you're moving.
Can you share what cameras you're using?
I can look them back up. They're one of those ones that are like OV and then just a really long number, but I can find it back.
Okay, thanks.
They start with an A, right? The name of the manufacturer. We bought those global shutter cameras on Amazon too that are,
Yeah,
I
Cam.
think they were like $70 or something. And we're getting, I think, 50 frames a second out of them as well. They're black and white. Mason, are you guys, what Swerve? Are you running Swerve, right? What chassis are you?
Yeah.
Rev or SDS?
We have SDS Mark IV Eyes with L3 and then the upgrade kit. And we're doing Kraken drive and then Falcon steer.
Can you share your GitHub for your code?
I'll put that in.
Love to take a look at it.
Yeah, that might be very helpful for my programmers as well with where we're at the moment. I feel like I was thinking about this early today with our particular swerve problems, but we've helped a lot of teams with swerve problems this year, and it seems like almost all. I think there was one Rev team, but all 7 SDS teams have come to us for help this year. It's really becoming evident to me that the Rev setup with their troubleshooting, their DLL, their library that you embed, it seems to be doing a really good job for those teams that have purchased Rev.
Yeah, I think Rev's just doing the better software support there.
And documentation and troubleshooting. I haven't seen any of it, but just hearing what other teams are doing, it does sound like Rev is, well, it's the complete package, which I think is what their goal was too, rather than sort of leaving you at the mercy of WPI lib.
Yeah, I think it's also because SDS doesn't have like one official supported code base. You end up, like for us when we're helping teams, there's all sorts of various custom. You've got the CTRE one now. There's the, can't remember. It's a 300 numbered team. They have a code base that a lot of teams use. Yagacel. There's so many out there, and they're all a little different. For us, like when we've helped other teams, it's always somewhere where they're normalizing the angle wrong, because the most common problem that we've seen is just like our wheels keep spinning around randomly, and it's always the angle normalization. Are there any people on here who are using a tank drive? Like, how is that going this year? Because it seems like it's a lot stronger year to have tank than it was last year.
We used tank last year, and we just went over the charge station every time because the tank honestly was almost easier than a lot of the swerve people that we were, playing with. So we didn't have but I understand what you're saying about the linear. Like once you pull up, you got to be accurate when you pull up, and then you're fine. There was one team, there's 4215 at Irondale. They were doing tank, and they had an autonomous that went back, got the middle one, the one directly behind the subwoofer, and shot it. So I don't know. I think they're doing pretty good. But. We've loved swerve. We did pit, like kind of pit scouting at Irondale, and I mean the amount of swerve is just unbelievable compared to last year even. And last year was even more, but like, man, tank is just really falling off.
The other question that I had, I wouldn't really expect it, but is anybody running a turret? Because like so far we've seen pretty much nobody using a turret. I've seen like 6036 has a turret, and I think, can't remember the number, but Super Nerds also has a turret. But we haven't seen any around here. It doesn't really seem like a very effective thing, especially if you have Swerve Drive this year.
Well, we thought we wouldn't need a turret for Rapid React because we had Swerve Drive. But it turns out that if you're getting pushed and you're trying to aim at the same time, Swerve Drive doesn't really help you as much as you thought it would. So I wish we had maybe pushed a little bit harder in 2022 to have a turret for Rapid React, because I think our assumption was wrong. In this game, I feel we talked about a turret, but I think the biggest problem with this game is that the pickup is challenging. You could align your turret in whatever way you needed it to do, but the ring of the turret makes it tricky of figuring out how to get a note into there. And I feel like the climbers for most people are going to really restrict the amount of rotation you can get, which makes a turret not very effective. So honestly, I don't know how we would incorporate a turret into our current design, even if we wanted to try to add one in the month after Duluth. But I think it's less about the effectiveness and more about trying to figure out how do we even stick it onto our robot with the intake and the climbers that we have.
Yeah, and we've ran like now hundreds of cycles, and we've actually found that it's a little better to shoot off at a slightly off angle, because then the note's much less likely to bounce off the backboard and straight back out. Because if you hit this side, it sort of ricochets in instead of just bouncing straight back out. Because if you're shooting dead on, there's a lot of bounce shots.
What I noticed at week 0 is a lot of teams are shooting a lot harder than they need to, which helps lead to those bounce outs.
Yeah, we started turning down our shooting speed when we get within 3 meters. We reduce our shooting speed. It's still pretty hard, but we blew out the back of our speaker a couple of times shooting at our 5 meter distance from the subwoofer. Broke the zip ties and busted out the back of the speaker. So we also felt like, hey, we can turn this down because we'll get up to speed quicker. We'll burn up less battery. And so anything inside 3 meters, we tone it down. It's not a lot. I mean, I think we went from 90% down to 70% at the most when we're at the subwoofer. Still goes up there at a pretty good clip. But we also felt like we didn't want our shooting calculation to drop so low, because we felt like if we do our interpolation of our shooting points and then we have such a severe drop of power that could lead to inaccuracies. So we did keep it up much higher than it needs to be, but that was more about consistency as you back up.
Yeah, we found
for us, when we're up against the subwoofer, we're going 20% power. And it gets in every time.
we found that like at close range you don't need any power, but at range to keep the notes flat for the shot, we needed quite a bit of power. So when we're shooting from the back of the wing line, we're going 90% power, and it just lasers up there. The other thing that we were kind of noticing is auto setup is clunky this year because there's not a lot of good places you can start in auto and hit the note, especially with a lot of teams that have just a one note, they just shoot it or nothing at all. The leave bonus is very easy, barely have to move at all, but starting in a spot where you can get that is tricky.
And leaving room for a team getting the 3 in the middle or whatever. Clunky is definitely or cramped is the word that I was thinking about. When we were running our auto at Irondale, we'd often have to like gently discuss with the teams like where are you going? Because if you go here, like we're gonna be there. So it's tough.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be important for teams to have a secondary and tertiary option, primarily just to stay out of the way, because somebody's going to get to do the big auto, and then the other folks are going to have to be able to say, I can contribute in this way or that way, but my primary purpose is to not run into everybody else. We started making a list of all the likely autos we thought we would need, and at 10 we said, okay, let's just stop right here, and let's focus on these 4 first, because there were a lot of options of how to run an auto that wasn't the big pick up 4 notes and then maybe run to the center line if you have time. Okay, what are all the other places you could actually do an auto? Because I think the 4 note or 4 note plus 1 auto is kind of obvious for anybody who thinks they can do that in enough time. The hard ones are like, oh, what else is left? And how do I do that without running into somebody?
If we had one more match at Irondale, we would have run our side, like go to the far side and do 2 center lines, like get out of the way and still try and contribute. We have not yet done one for the left side, whatever, the cramp side. I'm not even sure what that robot would do other than shoot and just like get out of the way.
Yeah, and also on that side, Jeremy, there's only like 34 inches between the side of the note, so you almost can't even sneak past it without bumping it. I almost wonder if the not 4 note robot they need to both start on the more open side. But I will say for anybody who wasn't at the KnightKrawler Week 0, Jeremy's team Gears did amazing. Their 4 note auto was outstanding. You guys clearly had the best auto there. It was fantastic.
Yeah, we I've talked about this before, but we got our max swerve on a Tuesday of build season. I think it was like week 3 of build season. We had it together on a Thursday driving, and we were doing path planner on Saturday. So I mean, we've been kind of prioritizing that from the beginning. So, but that's nice of you to say, Scott. It's I think the auto discussion is definitely big on my mind of like how that's going to go before matches. If you have 2 teams who are like, I can do 4. Like, I think that discussion is going to be kind of fraught sometimes. And I'm not sure how to coach our drive coach on how to approach that. If anybody has any ideas, I'd love to hear them.
One idea that we had was if you what we've done is we have a 5 note auto, but basically you can just keep cutting it shorter and pick up less notes that are convenient for other teams. So it'll shoot 1, pick up the one that's closest to the amp, go to the center line, pick up one of those next, because those are unlikely to be contested by other teams on your alliance. And then if you didn't have the time to like cut it short in path planner, you can just hit the A stop button and it'll stop going. So if you say, okay, there's another team that's going to pick up the one right in front of the stage and that's our last note, you just A stop before that and it's not really a problem.
That's a great point, Mason. I mean, I think with how hard it is to find a place to do auto, if you have 2 teams that have done a very good job of playing their auto, one could shoot the one it has and pick up 2 notes. The other one could shoot the one it has, pick up the note out on the edge by the amp, and then drive out to the center line, and you can share those 3 easy notes to pick up, and your team will probably be better for it, because that would leave the space on the other side for that team to be able to get in close, shoot their note, and get across the line and get out, and maybe get to the center line too. The idea that the best team there is going to be the one that can always do the 4-note auto might not be true, because it might be better for them to be able to be capable of sharing those 3 easy notes, so their partners can get their notes in as well and then get out to the center line. Yeah, there's a ton of strategy around auto, and the problem is you just can't talk to your teams far enough ahead of time, because if they haven't coded it, it doesn't matter, right? You're not.
And if
Well,
they haven't tested
Mason's
it.
team has 100% confidence in Path Planner to be able to do an auto on demand with 3 minutes notice, but I think few other teams will
Definitely not 3 minutes notice. It's crazy. I was watching some of like Spartan Robotics talks, and they're like, "Yeah, we talked to our alliance partners 3 hours before our match." It's like, who actually knows what they're going to do 3 hours beforehand? You have no idea what their robot's even going to be capable of. And so for us, it's like having a nice one where you can just stop anywhere in the middle. Then you have a 1-note, you have a 2-note, you have a 3-note, 4-note, maybe even a 5-note auto, and just depending on where you stop it. The other thing that I'd recommend is now with Path Planner, you can in the autos, you can either set it to have a preset starting location or tell it not to. And what I recommend for all of the teams using Path Planner in that way, and if you have vision, make a duplicate and make it have a preset starting location. Because if your vision isn't working, or your odometry isn't, well, if your odometry is working and doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But if your vision isn't working and your robot doesn't know where it's starting, then it's nice to have a preset starting location. But otherwise, it's nice to have it so you can start in more flexible locations. So for us, it's so long as you're pointing at the speaker, we can start anywhere during auto.
Hey Mason, is that code that you the first link that you sent, is that like a simulation thing, or is that your actual?
That's everything. So we simulate our entire robot. We've done that for 2 years now. So I can't really run it right now, but we have a bunch of simulated tools like custom stuff, but as well as we're using a lot of the WPI simulation. And so like from writing the code to testing on the robot, it's usually about 10 minutes per mechanism. Basically just figure out which way the motor's going and it's already done. So does that kind of answer it?
I think so. Yeah, I just had somebody else glance at it and they're like, "This just looks like a simulation." So I think they just need to dig a little bit deeper, maybe.
Yeah, we have a lot of like integrated simulated stuff. So like all of our Talon FXs are like Talon FX with sim. So it's just a wrapper around the Talon FX that adds a simulated motor onto it.
Thanks.
Where's everybody planning to shoot from?
Subwoofer only. We're fixed angle. So
We
we have
got
to go to
subs for subwoofer and podium currently, but need to get that podium tuned in properly. We don't have the right angle set for it yet.
We have everywhere pretty much that's legal, but excluding the center zone. But our favorite spot is definitely along the auto line, that black line. That's a really nice spot to shoot from, just outside the subwoofer, but then also from really far back is quite nice.
We're hoping to shoot mostly from around that auto line to podium, I think. We were having some problems with odometry drifting, but it sounded like they were able to figure out the root cause of that afterwards. Unfortunately, at KnightKrawler, we tried to set up an FMS that's very nearly identical to tournament FMS, and some of the networking gear wasn't working, so we had to fall back to the way we had been running week 0 for years with our old hardware. And so that meant most teams couldn't talk to their processor. So most teams were running without vision, or their vision was sort of sporadic. We didn't have vision for pretty much the entire day on our robot. I did see that it was sort of working sometimes, but anyway, even in our testing, we were having problems with odometry drift. If we could see both tags on the speaker, it got lined up pretty well, and we didn't have any issues. If it only saw one, it's sometimes you'd shoot a little bit left or right. But afterwards, it sounds like they found the source of that, and now ordometry is much more accurate. But we feel pretty good. It depends on, but again, it depends on the note. You get past the podium and you have a new note that's brand new and it's a batch 2 note, it's probably going to go high. So it'll be really interesting. But I think we're going to be sort of in that arc, similar to what you were discussing, Mason. Anywhere in that arc will be okay. Does anyone have a strategy of shooting from the amp? Because that's a protected zone, right? So nobody can hit you while you're shooting if you're in that box around the amp. It's sort of an angle, but if you're in the backside of that angle, it should be a pretty decent shot, even though you're off to the side.
The angle's not crazy. For us, what we were finding is like defense is not that effective in their wing. Where it's really effective is kind of blocking them from going past their stage. Especially tall robots might struggle a lot with defense, given that you can't go under the stage. There's
Yeah.
like the distance between the stage feet and the edge wall is so small that you can just block with one robot. That might be a valid strategy too. If a robot isn't working, just sit in that spot and you've pretty much prevented the entire other team from picking up from their source without going really far around.
Yeah, I know I was watching Israel, and in there, you guys know Steampunk 1577. They're a pretty good team. I think they were having intake issues, but their driver has a lot of practice. So they had to go on to defense, and they basically shut down the whole other alliance for the entire other match. Like, defense seems to be really effective this year because, like, you have two, like, main lines. You're trying to go, like, under the stage or through the source side, right? You kind of don't want to take the amp alongside. So you can basically just block off those two lines and shut them down mostly.
Another strategy idea that our team was having is kind of the idea of a cleanup bot. So our robot now has a really nice tune from long range, but of course it's going to miss some of the time. And so we could be a robot that picks up from the source and then just scores really from a long way away. And whatever shots we miss, another robot can clean those up. And then you also stay out of each other's way as much as possible. And maybe a third robot does the amp, and that could be a strong like strategy for playoffs too, especially cleaning up those 5 notes that are in the middle that or whichever ones didn't get picked up during auto. I think a lot of matches are going to be decided by who can pick up those right away.
Mason, what kind of accuracy are you seeing from the wing line or just beyond the wing line?
About 90%.
Wow.
And that was, we were testing with brand new notes, really old notes. We had some really chewed up ones, and it's not perfect, and it doesn't work on lower battery because we're running at 90% power with a not voltage compensation. We're running it with velocity control. So at some point it just can't reach that velocity.
Right.
But it does save you battery life and that you don't have to cycle as far. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah. We're also running at 90% velocity. And I think that we were seeing about 50 or even less, maybe 30% accuracy from the bumpers just behind the wing line.
Something that we also found is if you shoot it hard enough, it'll just tumble in. Like you can just really pound the notes in there. Even at closer range, so long as there's no risk of them bouncing out. A lot of ours, like they might tumble just before the speaker, but they'll still make it in because they just hit the bottom lip and still jump right in. And for the ones that don't, so in our practice matches at Miro, we just had the other team basically pick up close and then score those. But it is the cleanup, in my opinion, I think it's stronger on bots that don't have the arm system, because it seems to me that the arms are better if you're doing like full field cycles where it has enough time for the arm to fully raise up to shoot. If you're shooting close, I suppose you don't have to change angle very much from picking up to scoring, but it is a limiting speed factor.
Yeah,
we're doing.
I like that.
You go, Scott.
I said I like that. I like the idea of shooting from range and then having bots that just stay close and pick up anything that gets missed.
I'm thinking,
especially if they're also kind of playing defense against the defense. I don't know how to phrase that, but if they're just there they could play defense against the source, right? Try to stop robots from getting the source, and then as soon as there's a miss that they can go clean up, they run over there and pick it up and score it.
Especially, I think our our theory is that at Duluth, once per, for every match, there'll be one team on your alliance that can maybe pick up off the floor, but they can only shoot from subwoofer. And that's like a perfect thing. Just clean up all the rest of the shots, and then nobody gets in the way of the subwoofer for them.
Yeah, we do a PID RPM control on our shooter wheels, and they're running at 8,000 RPM, which I don't know what the voltage is on that, but it's basically as fast as we could go. And we shoot at subwoofer up close, and we've never had one bounce out. The ones that missed at Irondale was we just weren't aligning. The speaker's only so big, so especially when you're on the corners of the subwoofer, if you don't aim exactly right or you're not further enough either straight on or at an angle, you can miss a little bit. But we don't have any bounce out just because the angle's so steep. Exactly what Mason was saying, that it just tumbles around inside and just kind of like washing machines and then falls down. So
it's the podium range for us is the dangerous one.
Yeah.
You have to shoot it hard to get it in there, and a lot of them bounce out. Especially it depends a lot on where your driver station is, where you're shooting from, because generally drivers prefer to see their robot when they're shooting. And so if you're in far left driver station, you're shooting from the far right, it's really tricky.
Yeah, the view from each driver station is so unique. It's really interesting. I think, at least compared to even to last year, where at least you're all in front of the grid. It's all very, very different this year.
I noticed a lot of heads being stretched like this, trying to look around the speaker for the amp scoring. I feel I was sitting next to somebody in the stands, and the two better positions, the two stations that are on one side of the amp, I feel like driver station 3, which is the one that's all by itself, right? That's 3. That's the one where really nobody wants to be. But then the other two, I feel like the students were really craning their head if they had to score on the amp. So
our strategy for driver station 3, or the one that's all by itself, is to walk actually almost like just to the edge of the field, so you're as far over as possible. Then you can get a direct line of sight to the source. But I think driver station 2 is by far the worst. You can't see the source. You can't really see the speaker. You've got both stages in the way. And climbing on the stage isn't that simple either, especially if you're doing trap. The perspective's super messed up because you're not seeing it head on. You're seeing both chains at an angle. It's really hard to line up for the trap. That might be something that when we add our trap mechanism for week 5, we might add some sort of auto alignment for that as well.
We're really hoping that we can make it so that you press a button and the robot does everything it needs to do for the trap, because we have to start out underneath of the stage and come up, which probably if you're doing trap, you're in the same boat. And so, yeah, it is really tricky to get everything lined up correctly if you're trying to get on the chain to score on the trap. But it's nice that there's an April take there, because if you get to that point, you should be able to write code where the robot can automatically drive itself perfectly back to the right distance and start raising all the arms and mechanisms and whatever else you're using to climb.
Has anyone used a field that has the more official stage that has the polycarbonate that it's built out of? Because from what I've seen, I got some pictures from the official week 0 in New Hampshire, and it doesn't look that bad at all for viewing to the source. I don't know if I can share these here in some way, but
we purchased the official polycarb door, and so one of our stages at week 0 had the official polycarb door with the official weights and everything on it. I will say that when we put it together, the very first thing we did is we went over the note and started pushing on it with a note, and the new notes on the new polycarb, it just stuck right to it and folded over. It did not slide at all. Now, what's the chances of that's what the door is actually going to be like by week 3, week 5? How many new notes are we even going to have available to us? So it'll be really interesting. I think that door is going to play very differently depending on the week that you're in or what quals match you're in. I think the door is going to play very differently. Something I didn't expect is the door, and I went back and forth with the different mentors. I'm like, do you really think this is right? It wasn't even a quarter of a pound pressure to push that door open. It was virtually nothing. And so we were unsure of, is this really the way it is? Because we were looking at this and saying, well, how could we have screwed this up? And what we think may be the difference is that we may think one of our hinges had a slight arc in it, or maybe a bend in it, and the hinge wasn't as loose as the official hinges might be. But again, how straight are those hinges going to be by week 3, week 4, week 5, after the field's been taken apart and put back together? So maybe those hinges will be just as stiff and really won't flop shut as quickly as what we were saying. So I don't know. It's a sort of a mixed bag of, this is pretty easy to get the door open and hold it open, but also new notes, very clean plastic, it's pretty sticky. So I don't know if that was helpful to you at all, but that's what we experienced with our official door that we purchased.
We got the official ones from Handy Mark too, and they are very light. It doesn't take hardly anything to push them open. And we also have the official truss structure. So our stage was 100% polycarbonate, and versus playing on a practice field with plywood ones, your sight lines really aren't that bad looking across the field with the polycarbonate ones. It's not terrible. So take that as you will, I guess.
The other question that kind of to follow up with, like, fields getting fixed sort of, is like, does anybody know how they're going to reintroduce new notes into the batch? Because obviously week 1 they start out with all new notes, but what's their plan for putting in new notes? Are they just replacing the absolutely broken ones, or is it slowly replacing the really beat up ones too?
I don't know if anyone on this call would really know what the plan is for that. I know in past years with game pieces, they've typically had a batch of game pieces for each week with the field. So each week we get new game pieces, but then on practice day, they would maybe use old game pieces to avoid getting the new game pieces all torn up.
That's
and then
really
those
good.
old game pieces could be introduced then as needed as the event goes on.
That's really good too, as like to know, because it's like a warning too. If you're on practice day, all of your shots are a little weird, and you tune that, and then you come back the next day and they have all the new notes, and it's weird again. So
yeah, that's definitely a question that you can ask during the drivers meeting, though. If the head ref can't do it, then the FTA or the field supervisor would answer that question.
Has anyone tried shooting into the amp, like not with a dedicated placement mechanism? Yeah. So Jeremy, I think we have like a very, very similar robot to you. How have you guys been going about that? And how's your like accuracy?
PID motor control. I can look at the actual speed, like RPMs. I'll have to find the Google Doc that the students made. We've found it to be very accurate. I think some people on our team, when we did it the very first time, they were like, this can't be it. Like, this can't, like, there's got to be more to this than that. But with a lot of shots, and we switched out the plywood backing in our amp, and we put fresh polycarb on, so it was more representative of what the field was. We've found it to be really accurate. At Irondale, we never missed an amp shot, I don't think, or maybe we missed one because the driver was trying to go too fast, but we haven't had any issues yet. And obviously, I'm going to hedge my bets and say yet. For the amp, we have 970 for the top. Oh, so we have a top and bottom. The top is going 970. The bottom's going 1360. And what that does is it kicks the amp so it goes flat. So as soon as it hits the backing, then it slots down. So that's how we do it.
Okay. Yeah, we're doing that very similar to you guys. I think our bottom roller is like way faster though. I think we're like 2,000 on the bottom, then like 500 on the top or something like that. But yeah, we still have just a wood amp, so we were kind of worried about that. But I know in testing, even with beat up notes and brand new notes, we made 50 straight. So we were doing pretty good. So I think it's going to be,
Yeah, same here.
yeah.
And it might be a little bit. I don't know if you're at Duluth or not, because they'll have a full real practice field with polycarb, from what I understand.
Yeah, I saw that.
You might need to do a little bit of tuning with poly, because we had to change. Ours just changed slightly. I mean, it wasn't very much, but it, as far as we found, it works. So we're in the same boat.
Okay.
Yep, you just reminded me. Want to make sure everyone here knew about E117. No practice field without inspection. So you have to pass inspection before you can use the practice field at your events. But you can go to your practice matches without inspection.
That is really good to know. Thanks, John. I'll make a note of that for us at least.
We got our boys team has a fixed shooter too, except it's the wheels are not top and bottom, they're side to side, and we've had pretty good luck shooting into the amp too. Probably not 50 out of 50, but maybe 40 out of 50. So it can be done. It's certainly not impossible, and there's no other mechanisms. It's just kind of flipping them up in the air and they slot right in there. So.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, I was watching a lot of the orbit matches from Israel week 1, and it seemed like their robots definitely set up for the speaker, but they spent most of their time doing the amp, because it right away makes more sense to get 2 in the amp and just 1 in the speaker than it does to get 3 in the speaker. And a lot of the time they were the only robot really scoring on their alliance, but it still just made so much sense for them to do the amp. And so we're really hoping that we're able to shoot into the amp for week 1 reliably, because our amp mechanism got cut for week 1 last minute. So
Yeah, that's something it's kind of like a dilemma. You have the choice of going for more points or going for the ranking point. And I think they were just going for more points, which seemed to work out for them. I think they're number 1 right now in Israel. So that
I think
might be the strategy.
they've probably realized that it's pretty much impossible to get the ranking point solo in the speaker. We were messing around at Miro with throwing out like 16 notes on the floor and trying to pick them up, and it's just not really possible during teleop, even if they're close to your speaker, if you don't have to do full field cycles. But it might change by further weeks as teams get quicker and quicker at cycling.
Yeah, we felt like we had a couple matches. We felt like we were flying, and even with doing 4 or 5 in auto or whatever, we were only at 11 or something total. I mean, and we felt like we were like hitting on all cylinders, and we were only at 11. So I definitely agree, Mason, that would be really hard. And then to get 15, that means you would have to also put one in the amp. So there's that part too, which I guess counts as the 15, but still you're not just like doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that depended too on, as you said, on ones in the field. I mean, we were picking up ones that had been picked up, and you'd assume later on in the regional at least that the field's going to be pretty clear, or the floor is going to be pretty clear once the match starts in teleop. So.
Do most teams have reliable climbers? I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of the KnightKrawler week 0, but I would hope that that's something that a lot of teams have, especially for week 1.
Our climber works actually better than we expected it would. We hang very balanced, and we did not expect that. We didn't expect to hang as balanced as we hang. And we have 4 different attachment points for the chain. We have an arm that comes down like this, and we have 4 different places we can grab. So when you do a buddy climb, you grab at the end in one spot and towards the middle in the other spot, and even climbing crooked, we're surprisingly balanced. We were very surprised at how well balanced we hang. And since it's just an arm that comes down, we'll always grab the chain. The only time we would fail to climb is if both came down and we grab the chain at the very end. We can't lift high enough to get the back of a robot off the ground if we hang into both of the ends. So we just have to make sure our drivers get at least one side in far enough to grab in one of the 2 bottom spots, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah, we didn't realize until we started testing that our climber, which we thought would only be able to reach like 2/3 of the middle, was actually able to reach the entire thing. Because if you extend your arms upward, we have 2 hooks, and then you slide across. You're able to reach everywhere, even with a really short climber. So that's another interesting thing. Buddy climbs seem to be a lot easier than we expected.
We got the Max Planetary gearboxes, the cartridge ones. I'm not the expert on this stuff. And we originally had it only at 20-1 on each of our arms, which barely got it off the ground, but wouldn't stay. When the disable happened, we would just go right down. So then we got 9-1s, and we threw those on. So then we were at 180-1, but it took us 30 seconds to raise our arms up. So we got to back that off this week before Duluth. But technically we can climb. It just takes the driver has to be raising the arms for half the match. But we will be faster and better once we get to Duluth. But technically we can do it.
Yeah, we're really happy running 54-1 on both sides on a Falcon. And that's a really nice ratio. You stay up for around 12 seconds for us on brake mode.
We're running 550s.
On a
I saw your
climber?
face.
On a climber?
Yeah. If you gear him enough.
I don't think I've ever seen that done before.
We like to be unique over here in Blaine. 180-1. Those suckers. We were carrying a robot by our arms. That they don't go down at 180-1. Obviously, that's not what we want. You're sacrificing time on that, but it works. So. Anybody else climbing? KnightKrawler, your climber was great. It was really cool.
We're kind of using the Australian RI3D concept, but we have a lead screw to raise and lower our arm. Then we have a little cut down climber in the box that sticks on the back of it that can reach up and grab the chain. That doesn't actually pull us off the ground, but it hooks the chain, and then we fold our arm down. And that's what actually lifts us off the ground. And we hang pretty centered. We can't get all the way to the edge right now. That might be a modification that we'll make, but it doesn't take long. And the climber in the box is 125-1 with a Falcon and rev gearbox. Nothing real fancy, but it's kind of a 2-step process. Hooking it, railing it in, and then folding our arm, which we can do pretty quick. But
yeah, we're using the climber in the box, and it only takes a few seconds for us to get up. Unfortunately, it takes. We could only hold it for like 5 seconds before or 7 seconds. So we have to at the end. So we just put a ratchet on this week, but only takes a few seconds to get up. Very simple from last year's design.
Something that we noticed too is the quicker you can climb, the more likely you're able to make use of the high note, because chances are your human player isn't going to make the first one, and in 20 seconds, by the time they actually make one, say they ring the third one at 5 seconds left in the match, are you able to climb on that specific spot? For us, the lining up is we can line up quickly, but you end up hitting the chain pretty hard, and so it's a little dangerous.
Yeah, that's a good question. How does everybody feel about their human players after their week 0?
We're not very confident, but the other question that I had was, how do teams schedule their human players and figure out who's doing it? Because we were thinking we'd have 2 different people, one that would do the source, the other one would do the amp, but it's really hard to know what other teams are going to do. And so putting together a schedule with what everybody's going to be doing is pretty much impossible without knowing what other teams are trying to do.
I'll go back to what I said a couple of weeks ago, is that if 2 people want to do, or 3 people want to do the stage, they want to throw the rings, take them over the practice field, whoever scores goes. And I realized that that's sort of a crapshoot, because you could have a bad practice match, but you might be the best thrower. But based on what I saw at week 0, I think it's sort of a crapshoot anyway, whether somebody's going to make it or not. So I don't know. I'm not the drive coach, so I don't get to make those decisions. So don't take that advice as anything that we actually might end up doing. But I don't have an answer to it either. I think the assessment that you made, Mason, of our human players need to throw quicker. I think that's going to be important, because if they do manage to get one on there, you want to try to get your robot over to that chain to climb. So I think that a lot of what I saw at week 0 is the 20-second, is it 20-second sound would go, and then they would go pick up the rings, and it's too late. You need to have those rings ready to go, and you need to be throwing that first one at 20 seconds and get the other ones out quick too.
The other thing that we found is both human player positions are every human player is undervalued in how difficult it is, because you really have to know what's going on, not just with your robot, with every robot. The source we talked about earlier was definitely one of those things, knowing when to put out notes. So it's not too early, but it's not too late either. But the amp too, knowing when to click that button, which button to click, that's not trivial. It's really hard to know what the rest of the drive team is going to do. Are they about to go pick up another note and score in the amp, even though you already have 2? It's so hard. But I think the scoring the high notes is something that no team can count on, especially trying to do a buddy climb on a high note microphone. It's just not really going to happen very often. So to me, it seems more like a fun gimmick. It's really fun to watch, especially when people make it, but it's so hard.
Yeah, I agree. That's why we ranked our trap mechanism so high when we did our initial strategy assessment, is because we just didn't think that would be something that you could count on to get that second ranking point, or the second bonus ranking point. But yeah, I think it's going to be just kind of there'll definitely be matches that'll be won and lost because someone got a ring on the note and it made all the difference. And it's unfortunate when you introduce that kind of randomness to the outcome of a match, but it does make things interesting. Oh,
and another thing, teams, please do not forget that you score points by just ending with your bumpers in the stage.
Yeah.
Everybody forgets that. Last year, everybody forgot about the park, and it actually decided a surprising amount of matches. You would have just parked, would have won. But it's the same thing with the stage this year. It's so hard to remember, oh yeah, you got to end in there. Especially if your climber isn't working still, you gotta end in there. I don't remember when, but it might have been even KnightKrawler was pushing somebody into there towards the middle of the match just to get that.
They were trying, and then they realized that it's not working. Let's not break somebody.
Yeah.
And it's just bumpers crossing the line, right?
Yep.
There's no way you could be fully inside and have 3 robots parked into there anyway. And so one of the things that I noticed that people were getting fully inside, which can be dangerous if you've got people on the other side who are climbing. So I think that's an important thing to remember too, is that you just got to have the corner of your bumper over the line and don't go in there and risk knocking somebody off.
What we might do for week 1 is create a checklist of things to go over with your lines, to make sure they know specific rules, that note stealing is legal so long as you don't get touched, otherwise it's tech foul, that everything's bumper related. You don't have to be fully inside any zone for this. The protected zone for the amp, if I remember right, is you just have to have part of your bumper in there and it's protected. So it's so easy to forget some of these rules, but there's always, it's, heat of the moment, it's very easy to forget.
I have a silly question. I thought last year on Blue Alliance, if people got a ranking point, one of the special ranking points, there was a star on the match.
It was a dot next to the.
Okay, a dot.
The score, yeah.
Do you know if that's true this year? Because I'm looking at the Israel results, and there's not any. There's 0.
Really?
I don't know if those matches have been counted correctly, because they weren't up after the match was posted. Only the results were. There was no scores or anything. There was some issue with the Blue Alliance and first integration in that. So I don't know if you could tell by just that.
They are showing it. If you click on specific matches, it'll show the bottom ranking points. So I'm looking at just Quals 1 at Israel. It says +3 ranking points. So it does still show it, but it's not showing up in the normal score where it used to be.
There's no such thing as a stupid question, but that was kind of a stupid question. So thanks.
Well, that's a good question. I would be surprised. That was so nice last year to see the dots, and the top dot was
Yeah,
one ranking point, and the bottom dot was another ranking point. I would be surprised if they didn't do that again.
It's probably getting worked out right now. I'd guess that it's probably going to be done by the time that the teams are going to Duluth are going there. So I would hope that's up. I'd hope that Statbotics is also working because we really like that website.
So, Mason, you mentioned earlier about notes getting stuck in your robot, and you were doing everything you could to cover up all the points of notes getting stuck. Did anyone else experience notes getting hung up on a climber post or in their belly pan or anything like that?
that happened to us at Egan. So on our climber arms, we actually added like a vertical piece to try and make it bounce off instead of ring around the arm. So
Mhm.
for arms like this, we just have like a, not on the hook, just kind of backwards. That might help it bounce off. We also added a panel to the back of ours because we have a very open backside. So we added stuff, and it did happen one time at Egan. But it also, I think the one time it happened was a human player throwing a high note. So
Sure.
Something that teams might want to do is like if I don't know how many kitbot teams there are going to be, but the kitbot is particularly susceptible to getting notes stuck because it has to line up at the subwoofer. If you miss that shot short or high, or if it bounces out, it basically rolls down the subwoofer straight inside your bumpers and right on top of your electronics. And so if you get that note stuck, you're just done for the match, and that's no fun for anybody. And there's no zone that you can be in this year and hold two. So it's like if you get too stuck, you're just completely hosed, and your whole alliance is. So it might be helpful to just go up to those teams and be like, hey, just put a piece of tape across here. We'll stop that note from getting stuck in. I know we've had several robots. Our 2020 robot just taped up all sorts of spots so the balls couldn't get stuck in it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even duct tape or packaging tape, just keep going back and forth across the back of the frame, just cover things up. That's a good point. I don't think we got any notes stuck in our robot, but we also were thinking about that in our design, which is why we have arms instead of climber in a box type thing. We were trying to look at all the different places we would be a ring toss target and try to avoid that.
We got one stuck on our climber in a box on the back, so we added just some surgical tubing kind of at an upward angle so it'll deflect off of there. But I do worry about with our design, with the Australian design, getting stuck underneath the arm when that thing's up. So I'm thinking of putting like I haven't run it by the kids yet, but I'll run by them and like putting a piece of fabric in there that'll just accordion down, basically when it's down, and then when it's up, it's kind of taut.
Yep.
And hopefully they can slide off of there. I don't know if that's going to work. We'd have to test it, but
do a team shirt.
Nervous.
Do a team shirt. It's really fun.
Team shirt. There you go.
I've seen that. No Mythic's done that a couple times. It always looks like pretty good, especially if you just wrap the front of your shirt around that. Something that's a fun thing to do is have somebody in your team to spin the robot around in place and have everybody else try and ring one on the robot. You figure out pretty quickly how they get on there, and then the driver gets to figure out how to get them off. So
that's a great idea. That's a fantastic idea. I really like that a lot. We talked about doing a canvas underneath our shooter too, so that you bring your shooter all the way up, it goes taut, you pop out the note. But we're also hoping that if for some reason we would somehow get tipped on our back, we could run the shooter a little bit further back and be able to get ourselves righted. We haven't tested it. We don't want to test it. We don't want to break anything. But if you're in a critical match and you need to get yourself tipped back over, we don't want to tie our shooter to the point where we can't run it all the way back if we had to.
I noticed a couple of times at week 0, teams that had like a specific amp mechanism that would, unfold their entire robot. I saw a couple of times where they would miss their amp shot and would just fall right in their belly pan. Then they would pivot their arm back down. And I don't know how you would get that out. I know I saw like Becker in New London do it a couple of times, or once. But if you miss that amp shot, just make sure it can't fall back into your belly pan.
kind of another question is, what's the oh crap strategy this year. Like our robot doesn't work. What are you doing? I'd assume like defense, but is there any other way to score points other than leave during auto, play defense, then stay in the stage during teleop? Because like in previous years, you can kind of like shuttle game pieces back by just pushing them. I think that's still probably valid at the beginning of the match. If there's still a few out there, you can push them as far as you can into your own zone. But there's nothing saying another robot might just pick them up and score them anyway.
We have had discussions about how even if you had a partner robot that was disabled on the other end of the field, could you just push them in front of the subwoofer? Because that alone might be enough defense to disrupt the opponent team. If you could just get them parked, you wouldn't even have to be up against the subwoofer. If you could just get them in the way far enough so that people are trying to get around them or have to push them out of the way to be able to score. With your assessment earlier, in that everything around the subwoofer is going to be really busy, and if you can shut that off, it'll disrupt scoring. I don't know that I want to try to push a partner bot all the way across the field to park it over there, but that's an interesting idea of somebody being totally out of the match and being able to still be extremely effective just because they're in the way.
Another thing that we found related to defense is with the robots that are doing under the bumper intake with really high bumpers. Our robot has extremely low bumpers, like eighth inch ground clearance pretty much. And we had a match where at Egan where a robot went over our bumpers and into our frame perimeter and broke a GoPro mount. But that's going to happen way more than people think are, especially if you have those really high bumpers so the notes can come under all the way around. I much prefer if you're going to do the under the bumper that you keep most of the bumpers low and then you just raise the one that is on the side with your intake. But it's going to happen where there's a lot more going over other robots.
You don't like our bumpers then?
Yeah, our bumpers are also as high as they can be all the way around.
We're like 7.45. Like we're like as close as you can be.
Well, the boys team, our front bumper is that where the intake is, but the other ones are low just so we don't get notes caught underneath us and run them over.
Yeah, we did 3 low and 1 high, and we had Nick inspect our robot yesterday, and he must have spent 30 seconds looking at it with the tape measure to make sure it was 7.5.
Whoever's at Lake Superior is going to spend about 30 minutes with us, I think. Just warning whoever it is.
Well, we have 10 minutes left. I'd be happy to end early. Is there any kind of final discussions? And then I'm going to make a plea to everyone. Please, please, please sign up for topics. I don't think we have any topics going forward. I think there's still time to do some really interesting stuff. There's a lot of teams that won't even have competed for another month and can take advantage of some of the things that are coming up. So if you have an idea, if you have something that you're willing to share or is something that you're struggling with, I think that one of the best roundtables we've had this year is the one where Talon hosted a topic about wiring and didn't offer any advice and just was asking for help on every single topic. And I thought that was one of the best ones we've had. So if there's something that you're interested in learning more about, please host a topic so I don't have to come up with something every week. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I was going to do this before this meeting tonight, and I totally failed. But I was hoping to make up a PDF with a QR code for our Sunday night calls to try to get more teams engaged. And so if anyone is willing to do a QR code and hand it out to the teams at the events and just send them to 2052.com/roundtable, where they can sign up for the mailing list, host a topic, see all the YouTube playlist. If you're willing to make that up and pass it out, it'd be great to have more people on here. This isn't about KnightKrawler so much as about all the teams in the state. So it'd be really awesome if we could get more groups in here sharing their knowledge and asking questions.
If you don't have the capacity for that, Scott, we could print it out and bring them to Lake Superior. But
I would love it. I am so flipping busy right now. The chances of me getting it done beyond just a gigantic piece of paper with a QR code. But if you want to throw together some information and why it's interesting, it'd be really, really awesome to have more folks in here. And I can't remember who it was, but someone in here 3 weeks ago had said, "This is my first call. I didn't know anything about this." I would like to avoid that problem. I'd like to think that people aren't on this call because they're not interested or the time doesn't work for them, rather than that they didn't know anything about it. So as long as people know about it, then they have the option to get in here and join or watch it on the replay.
Yeah, we'll whip up a half sheet thing that we can hand out, and we'll make them.
Right. And Jeremy, if
Superior.
if you want to print out enough and bring them for all the events, I can certainly help arrange to get them delivered at the other events.
Hey, it's printer ink.
Lights,
it's the school.
Great
Sorry, it's the school's
Northern.
ink.
Yeah.
How many do you want?
60
And
per
I-
event.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to be humble here, but having this come from another team also just reinforces the fact that this call is important for everybody, and it's not just KnightKrawler trying to establish some type of reputation. So I really appreciate that. This is a call for all of us.
Yep, I'll get it done.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it. That's why I'm volunteering, is because it's really meaningful to me. As much as my wife maybe doesn't like it, but it's great for me. So
You're not the only one. But robotics season is only 9 months of the year. So okay. Thanks to everybody. I thought this was a great discussion tonight. If you have a topic for next week, please sign up to host the call. And I look forward to hearing how everybody's first week of competition went if you're competing next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.